Well, hello and good afternoon from the East Coast of the United States. We are going to allow for a few minutes as people join the webinar. So you can see we will be starting soon, but we're looking forward to the session with you today. And it will be just a minute or two before we get started, again, as people are logging in and joining. Well, hello, and I know we still have people joining from all around the world today. We're excited to get started with today's webinar. It has just turned to 1 o'clock, so we're going to give it another moment or two so people can join. And while you jump into the webinar today, please take advantage of the chat feature in the chat room. Feel free to introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from. Our presenters will be monitoring that and being just to have an appreciation of where everybody is joining from today. However, while you might introduce yourself in the chat feature, please use the Q&A option within Zoom for any questions or concerns you have. I'll share this again in a few moments, but the format of today's webinar will be for all of our panelists' presentations, and then we will move into a Q&A session afterwards. So again, we're just going to wait another moment or two for everybody to get here, and then we will get started. And if you haven't already, or if you'd like to, feel free to find today's panelists on LinkedIn, make those connections. That's one of the benefits of what Gateway International does, bringing people together and forging those networks. So we appreciate you doing that. Okay, well, really excited to go ahead and get started today. We have quite a few people making great introductions inside the main room or inside the chat room. So to make sure you are in the right place, today it is March 27th, and today's session is called Maximizing Impact Through International Partnerships. This is part of the Gateway Leadership Institute, the 6th cohort of the Gateway Leadership Institute, which is focused entirely on international partnerships. I'm excited to be co-facilitating with my colleague Rosa. We'll introduce ourselves more fully in a few moments, but to make sure you're in the right place, we're excited to have you here. If you aren't familiar yet with Gateway International, please take time after today's webinar to sign up for the newsletter or to explore the website and learn the wide variety of services that are available through Gateway International to help your institution or your organization broaden what their international impact or footprint can look like, whether that is through study abroad, immigration, assistance with enrollment management, duty of care. There's a lot of great work and expertise within Gateway International that we encourage you to reach out and learn how the organization can help you achieve your international goals. In my day job, I am the Vice President for Enrollment Management at William Patterson University, and I'm excited to be partnering with my colleague, Rosa. I'll allow her to do a brief introduction.
Hello, everyone. Here I'm Rosa Almoguera, Dr. Rosa Almoguera, and I'm the Managing Partner for Edualamo. This is based in Spain, from where I'm talking to all of you. Very nice to have this opportunity to hear our panelists today. We're looking forward to that.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Rosa, do you mind introducing our partnering organizations and sponsors as well?
Yes, we have our partnering organizations today who are helping us bring this all for all of you and to our participants in this cohort. This is Boston Education Group, QS, and Prodigy Finance. Thank you to all of them for making this possible. And these are our sponsors. our sponsors today, and for this cohort are AECC Study Abroad Consultants, Shorelight, Forstay, IDP Connect, and Verify Ed. And as you can see, they're all finishing. Participants will receive a digital certificate of completing the institute from Verify Ed.
Great, thank you, Rosa. Well, I'm excited to introduce our panelists today and explain to you a little bit about what today's format will be. As I said, please continue to introduce yourself in the chat feature, but any questions that you have for our panelists, please use Zoom's Q&A feature, and then Rosa and I will facilitate a Q&A period at the end of the session. First, we have Clare Overmann joining us from the Institute of International Education, where she is the head of higher education initiatives and the director for the Center for International Partnerships. We also have Haohao joining us. He's the founder and CEO of the Boston Education Group. It's a real strength, I think, of Gateway International and our Gateway Leadership Institute to bring to you academic and industry leaders to share those perspectives with you. As a final contribution during today's webinar, I'm going to lead a conversation and pull Rosa in on a few things just to discuss some additional perspectives from the academic setting on international and strategic partnerships and leave you with a few resources. Today's webinar is recorded and will find its way online to the Gateway YouTube channel. So I'll even preface now, I have a few slides that are a little dense, and that's on purpose because I wanted to leave you with some resources to go back to after the fact so you can start building a system for yourself on your own campus. So without further ado, let's jump in and hear from our panelists. First, we'll hear from Clare Overmann.
Wonderful. So is that working, George? Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm so excited for this conversation about a topic that is so dear to my heart, which is strategic international partnerships. In the course of events over the next hour, I'm going to be kind of the high level context setting part, but I look forward to continuing the conversation during the Q&A session, in the chat, and then even after this webinar, if you'd like to stay in touch. So as George mentioned, in addition to being the head of higher education initiatives at IIE, I also direct our Center for International Partnerships, which has been around for over a decade and kind of looking at this question of what makes a good international partnership for quite a while. So, the landscape and the context is constantly changing. So I hope to get into that with you today. I thought I'd start with indeed just a little bit of the context in which strategic international partnerships exist. We know that they are not existing in a vacuum. They're not just out there by themselves. They exist within the broader global higher education ecosystem. And that ecosystem, whether you're in the United States or somewhere else in the world, I think are all facing a lot of the same key issues, challenges, opportunities, just current things happening in the higher education space right now. Everything we learned throughout the pandemic, challenges, learnings, opportunities, new modalities, new things to be thinking about. I think every institution around the world is probably facing some sort of scarcity in terms of resources or reallocation of resources, new funding pressures, whether from your state, from the federal funding, your ministries, whatever, everybody's facing some sort of difference in resources right now. A hot topic for sure in the United States, but really around the world, is the topic of diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, and how to make that a meaningful part of the higher education space. Obviously, technology, everything from the ubiquitous use of Zoom to new master's programs in artificial intelligence and the use of that in both the higher education space and in industry. And then, of course, there's has been a growing interest and scrutiny in the value and the return on investment on a degree. And so it's with that context, and these are just a few of the issues currently in global higher education, that we look at some of the solutions for that. And when you think about any of these issues, the topic of internationalization really comes to the forefront as a key part of those solutions. So you pick any of these topics, and internationalization can play a key role in tackling those challenges or taking advantage of those opportunities through things like student and faculty exchange, research collaboration, internships and service learning, collaborative online learning, you name it. Internationalization is right there in tackling all of these issues. And then when you look at kind of the mechanisms for that internationalization, that's where strategic international partnerships play a huge role in kind of making sure that all of these topics are addressed. So strategic partnerships, this is really an evolving definition. When you look at kind of a very basic definition of what a partnership is, it's a formal agreement to work together for mutual goals between institutions representing two or more nations. That's a very simple one. A few years ago, IIE, we did a study together with the Freie Universität in Berlin and came up together with a little bit more of a targeted definition for strategic partnerships, which is a formal alliance between two or more higher education institutions developed through an intentional process whereby the partners share resources and leverage complementary strengths to achieve defined common objectives. The key there being this intentional process. And really, I'm sure all of your institutions have your own definitions for what a strategic partnership actually means. And this definition has certainly expanded and evolved over time, now also to involve, multiple partners and also cross-sectoral entities. Many of our most common and successful partnerships these days are cross-sectoral with the private sector, corporations, governments, NGOs, etc. So I look forward to hearing about some of those partnerships in the chat from all of you. And I think I'll just kind of conclude this context setting part and segue over to how, with a few of the kind of top partnership trends and topics that we're seeing right now, which may apply to your institutional context as well. First and foremost, I think we're seeing an evolution from this kind of push for strategic partnerships, which I think is still certainly a part of the goal in the international partnership space, but evolving also to more of a partnership strategy. So we all know that your kind of more transactional one-on-one bilateral partnerships are certainly still going to be a huge part of the portfolio, as will some of the more comprehensive strategic partnerships that may affect the whole institution and all of the different types of partnerships in between. So a lot of institutions now are looking really more at the broader scope of their portfolio, making sure that there's diversification in modalities, in types, in regions, rather than just focusing on, just what is strategic only. We're seeing a huge rise in the partnership manager role on campuses, which is really great to see. We all know that partnerships actually take so much more time and energy and resources than any president or chancellor could imagine. And putting more resources, human resources, to that has been really important. The recent ACE mapping survey showed that nearly 30% of their respondents had a dedicated staff person for partnerships, which is certainly a jump from the last time they did that survey. Another big trend, of course, is just kind of in evaluating and tracking and demonstrating return on investment on partnerships. And we're seeing a lot more institutions trying to bake in some of those evaluation and monitoring tactics from the beginning of partnerships so that they can show the return on investment on the relationships going forward. A really important question that's coming up more that we don't have the solution for yet is just a rising concern about the ethics of partnerships and what makes partnerships truly mutually beneficial. A lot of times that term is thrown around as just a kind of a given, but really examining what mutually beneficial means in a partnership space is really important, something that we need to take the time to do. And I think it's becoming more of a topic of conversation between partners and at institutions these days. Technology on all fronts is increasingly important in partnerships. Everything from how to develop a partnership through the use of technology. We know that there's an increasing number of even softwares and programs that are out there that can help with some of the matching or finding partners. I know from some of the programs that we run that using technology and virtual communication has been a key part, especially post-pandemic, of developing those partnerships and strengthening the relationships. And then, of course, also with evaluating and monitoring the partnerships. There are a number of really great software tools out there that are starting to track partnerships and help institutions to make those data-based decisions on moving forward or evolving partnerships. And then finally, of course, in any higher education space, but especially in partnerships, we can't ignore all of the topics, all of the geopolitics that are happening these days that are affecting the context in which partnerships are happening. Everything from war to cybersecurity concerns and visa issues, all sorts of topics that are really, of course, affecting partnerships as well. And I'd love to hear from this group if any of these current topics resonate and what it means in your institutional context. But I'm going to hand it back over to George to keep the conversation moving.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. I mean, you introduced a wealth of information there. And I do want to remind our participants today who are attending, this webinar will be on Gateway International Group's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to refresh yourself on all of this great content, but we're going to revisit that during the Q&A. I want to thank you, Claire, and now pass it over to Hao to start sharing some industry perspective from the Boston Education Group.
George, it's coming up. Oops. It's first page. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you, George. Thank you to Gateway National Group for having me today, and thank you, Claire, for setting the contest. The contest keeps me humble. As you were speaking, I think about my career for the past 12 years in international education. The key factor to understanding the tone on the top, and deciding what programs to have in China, a very authoritarian government, and the tone at the top decides what we can and cannot do. And with the contest set by Claire, I like to use China as an example. I think that suits my ground because China is the only focus that I have in my company. So further, my name is Hao. I studied Boston Education Group really in 2018, but I've been in international education since 2010 when I was only a student, international student at Boston. At the time, I was hired as a part-time CFO for a subsidiary by the Ministry of Education. They were running a language program in the US, the very first language program for international students. And now we had more demand than the capacity. We're having 400, 500 students every year, full time, paying $50,000 per year to go to a language school here in the US. And to me, I thought it's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something that very likely was staying me for a lifelong career. And then in 2010, I studied multiple programs. And to Claire's point, and I didn't know that diversifying my portfolio, my offering of programs will benefit me at the end. 2018, I realized that might be a sustainable approach I should take to do multiple divisions of my company and have them under one big umbrella, Boston Education. We primarily with American institutions and educational professionals to offer America-based educational resources to national customers. So far, our focus has only been, and our mission is to match underserved students with world-class education opportunities. We're based in Boston, as we said in the name. Currently, we have 4 main divisions of our company. and we are also expanding. So if China might be one of your customers, if you're thinking of partnering with someone for the China, please feel free to contact me after the program. And if your appetite, I hope that you also learn something from this live example of how we run international for the market of China. Our first division is basic education of college counseling, and this is primarily to serve high net wealth. We've been doing this program for about 10 years. We help with the admission process, and this is a program, unfortunately, that is diminishing because affordability now become an issue in China. And as you know about international strategy, you need to keep in mind that the business market in circles, and right now might be a downward circle. That is growing is JNC International Summer. Partner with US institutions to academic program taught by their own faculty in China. All credits are transferable and they're credit-bearing courses, mostly general education courses offered by our partner American institutions. And it's a program that we're growing, especially during the pandemic. During the pandemic, as you know, American institutions were focusing on the domestic needs of students, and that actually opened a big window for us to grow. In 2020, our student number exceeded 5,000 per summer. In one summer, we have 5,000 students from around the world to participate in our program online virtually. And we continue, the program continue to grow. Right now, we are having likely 7,000 students this summer alone. The third division we have is Third-Star Life online courses. We partner with American institutions to offer courses to Chinese universities, to their third and second year students. And this credit are carried by the Chinese universities, but the faculty are American faculty teaching online in America. And we work with mostly tier 1 universities in China. And currently we have about 300 courses under our course catalog. The last one is Zhongxing e-commerce bootcamp. And that is true, during the pandemic, there was a big boom among e-commerce services company in China, selling products that are made in China to American markets. And we offer the bootcamp to train people's skills in selling those products to American market. And I think I would like to spend at least 3 to 4 minutes on this slide. It's very important to understand the policies in China before you approach it. One of the 3 points I would like to talk about in the slide, first one is policy interpretation. In China, they worship authoritarianism. Policy detects most business factors. Many who have a fresh memory of in January 2023, the Ministry of Education came up with a new policy that they no longer recognize online degrees. But how do you define that policy? I can assure you that even up to today, different industry leaders have different interpretation of that policy. Does that affect 1+3 programs, where first year is online, the 3 years were in person in the US? With this policy, is that still allowed? If that is allowed, what about 2+2? What about a transcript that doesn't say that the courses were taken online? Would that considered as online courses, even they were taken online, but the transcript says it's just the same transcript as they were taking on campus? So far, by talking with people from the Ministry of Education, my interpretation is as long as 30% or less of the courses were done online, it's okay. And how do they verify that? Eventually, when students take that degree from America and bring that to the Ministry of Education in China to verify that degree, they might ask to see the passport. Were the student actually in person in the US? So in order to do a program that is online right now, I think getting a connected source of information from the Ministry of Education will be very helpful for doing something in China. And sometimes you see that exact two program by different offerers in China. One might be approved, one might be different. And the background message here is the connection might be doing the trick. Also another one example will be interesting to be in June 2021, China all of a sudden banned for-profit businesses to provide after-school tutoring service on schools projects, on school subjects, math, English, a lot of the subjects that are being taught in K-12 schools are no longer allowed. And you see that in June of 2021, the stock prices of New Oriental or GSX plummeted over the course of a few weeks. They probably dropped 95 to 99% of the stock value overnight. GSX, as an example, before 2021, they had 70 million registered students and 60,000 teachers around the world. And it just that one change of policy, the entire conglomerate collapsed. So on hindsight, I think diversifying our product line at Boston Education Group worked. And it actually allowed us the synergy to work between division to division. But my point here being, policy interpretation is very important and policy could change very suddenly. What about appetite for internationalization after COVID? China, I think, welcomes more collaboration with Africa, Middle East, and Russia. That doesn't mean that they won't be working with American institutions. Nowadays, you see a lot of American institutions or Canadian institutions work with Middle East or African academic institutions to provide services to Chinese international students. So the internationalization doesn't mean that you're only working between one country and another. It could be collaboration among different nations. What we need to remember that Chinese elites will still come to America. So universities that gear their strategies toward Chinese elite students, they will still work. Working family students will seek education in America due to lack of jobs. Right now, there are about 20% unemployment rates among young people defined as 20 to 30 years old. The unemployment is 20%. And there will be 10 million college graduates every year. Only a third of them will find a job right away. A third of them will go to graduate school, leaving a third of them that might seek overseas education. And that opened the opportunity for us as institutions from America, especially consider today's tight labor market. But remember, it is a diminishing economy. It's an economy that is slowing down. So being creative with the program, allowing students to earn some credit before they come to the US to shorten their study time, shorten their financial burdens might be helpful in a program like this. And lastly, on this slide is establishing partnership. I think finding decision maker is very important. And when you work with the Chinese university, oftentimes it's the party representative of the university that make the decision. And also, I think it's very important for us to keep in mind that always willing to listen to the market. Right now, if you tell me as a business owner in education to create a program to attract undergraduate students in China, I would say that might not be the best time to do it. If you were to create something to attract K-12 students in China, I would say that the chance of success is very, very low. But if you're creating a program, for example, a 1+1 graduate program for Chinese students, I think the success rate will be very, very high. To conclude, if you're thinking of China, first thing to remember is to contact me. I hope I might be helpful for you. Our other point that we have talked about, I think understanding the importance of policy interpretation and the connections that you can find in China will be very important. Recognize that China still have a growing appetite for international education and collaboration, but remember that it might not be working directly with the Chinese counterpart. It might be working with another nation that's involved. And it might be working with a private business like us, small or big. We might find a platform that we can all collaborate together. Also remember to establish your partnership with key decision makers, such as the party representatives. And another point would be to adapt to the market needs, like offering hybrid graduate program, 1 year online or 1 year in person, or maybe offer a program with us, like JNC Summer School. We create short-term programs where we offer the program for 5 weeks every summer in China, and we have faculty from one American institution that we work together to travel to China to teach in China. And what are the benefits that bring to the institution? First of all, a lot of faculty see as an advancement opportunity to gain international exposure, especially with the China market. In return, it benefits your faculty. Your faculty will be more comfortable with teaching international students. And it also allows students in China to get their feet wet with your program. So when they're applying for graduate school, they won't only consider the ranking, which often the problem with the China market. They only look at the ranking. But think about this, if they have the opportunity to participate in one summer program, to learn with your faculty, and take credits with your academic program, they might see the value and the quality of it, and they might see beyond the ranking of your institution and decide that they will come here for a graduate program. My last point being, be the first to listen and adapt to the market, and you will win this market. And with that, I would like to return to George. I hope that I didn't go over time. Thank you, George.
No, you were great on time, and your last point of advice there is so critical about being, a fair critique of higher education in the US is often the difficulty we have with being nimble or getting caught up in our own bureaucratic processes that are there for many good reasons within our cultural and our systems, but it can prevent us from being first in market or the one who is able to adapt the quickest. So thank you, Claire. Thank you, Hao, for such excellent, interesting insights relevant to international strategic partnerships. Please, our participants today, use the Q&A feature. I'm going to use a few minutes, though, now to share some insights. I mentioned before that I'm currently Vice President of Enrollment Management at William Patterson University, but over the arc of my career, I have been the point person for global partnerships. I worked as an SIO in the Purdue University system. I did similar work at the University of Colorado and with the University of Pittsburgh. I invite Rosa to chime in at any point if she has some contributions, but I wanted to take advantage of this time to share some additional experience from my perspective that I think will be helpful and relevant for everybody who is here today. And then, of course, we'll wrap up and we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A at the end of today's webinar session. Now, this slide, don't be intimidated. I'm not going to read all of this text to you, but because this is a recording that you can find again on YouTube, I wanted to make sure you could come back to this as a resource, because so often we find ourselves in our career paths, being pressed with the question of why should we pursue strategic international partnerships? All of these bullet points that I have here, 1 through 10, they may not be, every one of these may not be a fit for your institution, but taking time to make the case so that you can marshal the necessary resources, identify those stakeholders on your campus, and build a strategy that will answer the question of what are you trying to build and why, that will help cement the concept and the support around why we are interested in strategic international partnerships. They, of course, I'm going to touch on each of these briefly, though, expanding access to global markets for our students and to our faculty and staff is critical. Providing students with those opportunities to engage in cross-cultural experiences is a fundamental part that can be built into these strategic partnerships. We want to have effective strategies and initiatives that help recruit and retain our international students, whether it's intensive English, it's a degree-seeking program, undergraduate or graduate, or even into the move for postdocs. People are helping as postgraduates on our campus, supporting research initiatives or being in the classroom with our students. We want to foster those international research collaborations. Those can bring together experts from around the world. One of the things that is a blind spot in higher education is that oftentimes our researchers only have access to research that is in the language that it was initially written in. And so by fostering these kinds of relationships, we encourage research to be in multiple languages, and it just broadens our capacity to advance, the broader human condition. Number 5, to expand our curricular offerings, and there's a lot that we can unpack. Each of these could be a webinar in and of itself. Six, I thought, why would we look at strategic international partnerships? It's about building institutional and national capacity by connecting the centers of excellence that are built around the world. Some of you may have heard, especially if you're administrators, in the Fulbright system, there is the Fulbright Administrator Award, and I would encourage you to look this up. But Senator Fulbright talked about the value of our international engagement being in the building of reservoirs of goodwill. And I was thinking about that while typing out this topic, because building that capacity and connecting our centers of excellence is a great outcome for a strategic international partnership. There's embracing multinational approaches to addressing global issues, helping our students and our faculty and staff see things from multiple perspectives. 8, I thought, was to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of our institution's operations. And it's a great way to kind of turn over some of the stones and reveal where we might be able to do a little bit more work by initiating and investing in these kinds of collaborations. 9, I thought, was to foster a culture of global citizenship among our students. This is an important area where you want to engage with faculty. They may help shape and craft, what is that definition of a global citizen? Again, a webinar all on its own, but it's a great starting point to have a conversation about, for our students who may not be able to travel abroad, who may not have the resources to do that. It's still a valuable perspective for them to gain, because where they're going to work is likely going to have some relationship or be some type of multinational multinational company. So it's important to cultivate that sense of global citizenship. And then lastly, in this list of why we might want strategic partnerships, I thought to develop innovative models of international education and mobility. Each of our institutions and organizations are unique with different missions and resources within them. So each one is going to spur something that is unique in terms of an offering for our students that we're either looking to expose to the rest of the world or that we're trying to invite to our campuses. So again, this will be on YouTube, and I welcome you to spend some time, and you can always reach out to Rosa and I or Gateway International Group if you want to think about how some of these can be applied to your institution. So I mentioned before, what are we building and why? This is by no means a comprehensive list, but if you're sitting there thinking you like the idea of international strategic partnerships, but what does that mean? It could be student exchanges across borders. It could be faculty exchanges. It could be like 2+2 programs, or sometimes they're called articulation agreements, where a degree is achieved through a joint curriculum, 1 or 2 years in the home country, and then finishing the degree in the US. You may have heard of COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning. These collaborative teaching programs they took off and got a renewed sense of focus during the pandemic, but they remain a viable option for strategic partnerships and are really rewarding for our students. I've run several of those in courses that I've taught over the years myself. They could be the research centers that we're looking to invest in, helping to solve a community initiative, whether it is the US team investing in resources abroad, or looking at those external partners and having them solve something that's happening locally for you. Collaborative problem solving, and of course, student recruitment. There are a lot of things that can become an international strategic partnership. But I just wanted to share some ideas for you if you're thinking about, what could this mean at your institution? Also, start small. If you don't have much happening right now, don't try to do all of these things at once, but find 1 or 2 where you can find a faculty champion and you have the resources around it, and build upon your successes over time. Okay, I know I want to get to the Q&A feature of everything, but I have 2 more slides that I just want to talk about, how do you set yourself up for success? There's a concept of, you want to have instruments for assessment within your strategic partners, but then separate and distinct is the overall evaluation of these partnerships. So setting yourself up for success. First, in my mind, you want to develop a comprehensive plan that aligns with your institution's goals and needs and the resources that you have available. Don't try to build something that doesn't move with the broader mission of your institution, or else it's going to be difficult to pull in resources, and then you're going to be working against the energy and momentum that might be happening elsewhere on your campus. In terms of efficiency, it's important to think through effective structures and processes for managing these partnerships up front. It could have to do with the communication channels that will be there. It could have to do with how decisions will be made, what technology might you have on campus. I have found a lot of luck over the years finding someone on campus with a title similar to a business analyst. These folks usually know what software is used all throughout the campus. And so if you don't have a large budget, you might find that the institution already subscribes to something that might not be 100% what you need, but it might meet 80% of your needs. And if it costs nothing, it becomes a real win for you. There's the whole concept of systematically or intentionally launching your initiative. So identify and initiate that partnership with institutions or organizations that share your values, that are going to contribute to the momentum that you have, and make sure that the overall agreement is well defined, that it's equitable, and you want it to be mutually beneficial. If it gets too lopsided, then over time it probably won't have staying power, and you want to build upon those successes. So it needs to be a win for everybody involved. Last few thoughts here. You want to create partnerships that are going to be sustainable. Like I said, building upon successes. So you want to foster open, transparent communication, building trust and rapport with those partners. Joint projects and initiatives that have ongoing evaluation for improvement are very important. That's what makes one of these agreements sustainable. And then lastly is the evaluating of the partnership. So you want to regularly assess, are you achieving the desired outcomes? You want to make sure that you are collecting data along the way so that you can leverage it for giving the necessary feedback, advocating for the resources that you need, whether that is money, software, staffing, but all of that should be, you should think about this at the beginning, even if just slightly, so that you're not caught off guard or surprised by it later. In this this cohort of the Gateway Leadership Institute, we are building a toolkit for international strategic partnerships. And some of the things that the participants are going to be looking at and evaluating are sample contracts, budgets, routing forms. Who do you want to make sure, even if they don't have to sign the contract on your campus, who needs to know about an initiative that you're building so that it is supported and taken care of over the years? The different assessment metrics you might have, or the evaluation strategy, the rubric that's going to make sense for your program. So later you will find that the Institute will be sharing a resource on the Gateway International Group website where you will have access to a toolkit that is authored by and largely constructed by the participants in this cohort of the Gateway Leadership Institute. Okay, so now, having shared additional information, I wanted to bring it back, and I'm going to ask my colleague Rosa to help facilitate some Q&A, and I'm going to jump in there now myself. So thank you so much for letting me have a little bit of that time. And Rosa and Hao will all be on deck to help field questions.
Thank you so much, George. I think this is very interesting, and just from the responses that we already get, the questions and answer, I can see there's an interest. So let me start by asking our panelists today, and I would start with Claire. And there's a question from one of the assistant people that are in the webinar today, and the question is there a resource portal on international partnerships? Is there anything that you can recommend from this perspective, Claire?
It's a great question, and I think these resources on international partnerships exist in a lot of different places. So clearly, Gateway International has some. IIE, or Center for International Partnerships, certainly have resources. I don't think there's one mecca for them, but I think these resources do exist out there in multiple places. And I think amongst us here today, and we could certainly pool a bunch of those for your audience.
And just to complete the question, there was another part that said, does Gateway have something like this? And as George just mentioned, there will be from this cohort a toolkit that will be shared from the Gateway side. So there you can access that for free. And a question now for Hao, even though you've already answered it, but can you explain more, what are the pitfalls today with international partnerships, do you think?
for my market, it would be policy change, and it's very representative in the international market because it's China. It's one thing that there's a bipartisan agreement that China is the problem. So with that, every time a policy change, it almost require us as practitioner in the market to change our approach completely, and oftentimes it means discontinuing the program. That almost require us to diversify our portfolio. We can hardly focus on one program and stick to it because it would just be too risky. And then what you see in the market is that there are more and more contractors for business than full-time people for business in China. So in China, a lot of the professionals in the education market, they are working for commissions more so than working on their payroll. And that's exactly the unpredictable policy is what's driving it. You never know what could change and when this department of yours will completely be erased because of a change of policy.
Thank you so much, Hao. And Claire, could you also answer this same question?
Yeah, I also wanted to just add on, I think there are a number of pitfalls in developing strategic partnerships these days. And I would even say that, very few partnerships are actually successful because there are so many pitfalls. Anything from, I think it starts with the challenge of creating partnerships or developing partnerships without a clear purpose as to why, and not, tacking those partnerships to actual institutional strategy, which is why a lot of them can fizzle out. And I think, just in terms of sustaining these partnerships over time, as George was mentioning, lack of communication, just lack of resources and the true infrastructure to support them can certainly be pitfalls in these partnerships, and kind of underestimating the administration and time and relationship building that is required of partnerships to actually make them thrive over time. Those are, I would say, would be my top pitfalls too.
Thank you so much. And there's a question also for George. Managing partnerships is really a challenge. Is there a software program or something that would be helpful to manage partnerships, do you think?
I don't have a specific software that I would say is like the go-to or one that I've worked with that I endorse specifically, but I do know that a lot of the programs that schools are using to support their study abroad efforts have elements or sections of their software that help manage or track partnership agreements, because they're tracking people and resources moving across borders. I would look to see if any of your existing study abroad related resources have an add-on or a feature in that regard. Otherwise, I don't have a specific software, but it will be something that might be an outcome of this meeting. There may be a provider who will reach out to us and we could feature them in an upcoming Gateway webinar.
Thank you,
Yeah,
George.
and actually, QS has had one of the first softwares called Move On, and I don't know whether it's still being used by some campuses, but that is one of the ones I've heard. And I think you're right, George. Like a bunch of the big software providers should have some tools. And then I know of a number of institutions who have created their own databases and could certainly point people in the right direction there, which have been really incredible to see.
Well,
Thank
I'm
you.
going to add to the chat box. I'm looking for it now. One of the earlier cohorts of the Gateway Leadership Institute focused on education technology, and there were some providers who talked about, like QS, I think Teradata had a module. There were a couple other that did this, and I will put a link to that in the chat box here in a moment.
Thank you, George. And to any of the three of you, there's this question about how to best manage partnerships over time. Like people, this is a question from Anthony Jarvis, and he says, people and institutional interests change over time. So I was wondering how you go about making sure partnerships stay relevant with real connections between the institutions.
I would like to answer that question. Thank you for that question. Based on my experience, I had the experience with working with institutions in Florida and Texas, and during the past few years, they all fell apart, and most likely because the policy pressure from the states of not working with China, and also potentially because the change of people in the leadership. So we see technology as a tool for increasing work efficiencies for the partnership. In terms of managing and sustaining the partnership, I also see the connection being very important. So there was one advice that came from Tony, the boss and the founder of Gateway International Group, to me. I see him as a mentor. He said one thing: agreement without the people working behind it is nothing. So my advice is to not only establish the agreement, but also have a contact person listed on the agreement and hold that person accountable for the actionable plans for the agreement. And it's also very important to do an annual visit with your partners and just to review how we did in the past year, how to set goals together for the coming year, and especially to look at the long-term perspective, how we can do this better, and ensuring that at least for the next year, this program will exist, and this program, the partnership, will grow and have support from both ends.
Thank you, Hao. This is really useful. And there's a question from Robert Carlin. Institution-to-institution partnerships often are entered without sustainability or of mobility of students. Do you have successful models of student mobility on one side with faculty training, teaching on another? Oftentimes, the financial officers are reluctant to develop tracking of monies that are not an exact match. Claire, do you want, or?
No, Hao, please start us off.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have a exact model currently in my portfolio that match what the question was inquiring about. So the summer program that we have, where we have currently around 6,000 to 7,000 students that go to China to study academic program, credit-bearing academic program offered by the American institutions. So we have students from around the world that come to China to study these credit courses. Meanwhile, we couple that with faculty development opportunities where the institutions send their faculty from America to teach in China. And the student and the China have that, and the student and the faculty have the special bond in China because faculty are in a foreign environment, looking at the student to guide them and looking at our office to guide them. And it allows the faculty to almost showcase their vulnerability and make them more approachable before the market of China. So the student in China don't see them at those higher up leader profile people that are not approachable. So I don't know if that answered the question. So, but in this program, we well match the growth of students with the growth of faculty by placing both parties together in a foreign environment in China.
Thank you, Hao. And Claire, there's a question about whether IIE will have a new grant funds in support of new directions in international partnerships this year.
It's a great question. We can always all hope for more funding for partnerships, for sure. And should there be any that come around, this group and our broader network would certainly know about it.
Thank you, Claire. And George, there's a question from Stephen Apayapati. It says, noting that we are talking about partnerships in international education practice, would you address how U.S. institutions could pursue a more ethical approach to international partnerships, particularly with the Global South, so that the real benefits of global education education are reaped by all irrespective of geographical location?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you think about the, what is the ethical challenge? It's, in this question, it sounds like it is about distribution or opportunity, not with the most common countries or the more common countries that we hear about agreements with. And I think that stems from the mission and capacity of the institution that you're working in. I know, like, just personally, I have family in Latin America and I've wanted to do projects down there. The cost of travel and some of the different activities has made it prohibitive for some of the ideas that we were spurring along just for the administrative travel. Sometimes there is an economic challenge with being able to create or foster, keeping the balance sheets of the finances involved, making sense for the agreement when the dollar is valued very differently or the local economy cannot support students studying in the US. So these are all considerations that I think a team has to be looking at for what the investment is going to look like for that institution and where they want to do those partnerships. Right now, a lot of schools are still recovering from the international enrollment losses that happened during the pandemic. And so there's a big focus on the student headcount and having partnerships that yield students on campus again. And that can be at odds with a good question like this regarding the ethics of a partnership, where they're not always financial or revenue generators, but they are speaking to the broader global missions that our institutions have. I think it is part of the value of attending our conferences through all of the professional organizations that are out there, so that we are developing and can not just parrot, but leverage the language that is being created to encourage these relationships. It's such a big topic. With just a minute or two for a soundbite, it's hard to tackle. But I think keeping it front and center and asking, making sure we're thinking through, what are the ethical considerations. You're a champion on your campus just by making sure the question is being considered.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to put in the chat box before it's lost. If you've never heard of them, one of the most rewarding international experiences I've had was being a Fulbright scholar on an international education or award for administrators. If you've never heard of these, please bookmark this, go visit it later. There's a timeline. A lot of the deadlines are in November or September. These are incredibly worthwhile experiences that yield, in most cases, the partnerships that we're talking about today. When you're thinking, how do I make these connections? Fulbright does an amazing job to help create spaces where these connections can happen.
That's such a great plug for Fulbright and other kind of State Department funded programs as a huge catalyst for partnerships. I truly believe all of the programs really help bring people together and really ignite those partnerships or create the seeds of them. So if anybody does have a question about the International Education Administrators Program, feel free to be in touch with me or go to the website that George put in there. I'll just go back quickly to the ethics question, because I think it's a really key one. And more, I think we need to be looking at partnerships with, of course, so much of international education, it has become, monetized, commodified. But I think stepping back with partnerships and looking at them from kind of a capabilities framework and thinking about what both parties or all parties are bringing to the table, and that not all of that is going to be financial, and really honoring that and respecting that and valuing all the different parts of a partnership that are brought to the table, I think is really important. That requires a whole different framework of thinking about what a partnership is, what a partnership's purpose is, and even just international education in general. But I think that if we can head in that direction, we'll be able to have many more fruitful partnerships between the so-called global North and South.
Thank you so much, Claire. And I'm so sorry that we have many questions and not so much time left. So we're making sure that all your questions get answered by our panelists today. But in the honor of time, we have to move on.
And so, of course, I want to highlight, and thank you, Rosa, that our next webinar, it's our final webinar in the 6th cohort of the Gateway Leadership Institute, is on Monday, April 7th. And the theme there is about evaluating the sustainability of international academic partnerships. So this is right in line, and it's a logical progression for what we were talking about today. So please save that date of April 17th. It does require you to register in advance. That link is available now, so you could visit the Gateway website to find that at your convenience. And of course, we want to thank you and thank all of our participating organizations and our sponsors, and of course, today's panelists for making our conversation today so rich and exciting. So thank you so much. Rosa?
Thank you so much to everyone today, especially to our panelists. And we do hope we can see you in our next and final webinar.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. We'll see you out there.
Thank you.